Okay, so we're going to shift gears a little bit because we've talked a lot about eco-socialist transition. We've talked about what it would look like to be able to allocate capital towards things that aren't necessarily profitable for private corporations, and what a society structured around other values might look like. For example, the value of delivering better lives for people as opposed to simply making the stock market go up at all costs. And it feels like that discussion would be incomplete without talking about China, because their economic system is designed differently. And they do seem to be doing a good job at allocating money towards certain social goals. For example, we see the network of high-speed rail that they've set up across their country and the amazing progress they've made on solar panel development and solar energy development. In the US, we have this idea that we need to beat China, that they are a threat, and any action we can take to stop their rise is justifiable for some reason. We don't really talk about like why it's so bad that China's on the rise, but you know, we have to plow capital into AI because we can't let China win the AI race, for example. Or we have to literally bomb Iran because Iran is getting too cozy with China, with no effort really put into like what's so bad about that. It's just like they're a boogeyman at this point in the West, the same way that the Red Scare effectively created a boogeyman out of the Soviet Union and communism. We now have this like fear of China baked into American culture effectively. So what's going on here?
Yeah, this is amazing. So it's interesting because there's been such an interesting turn in Western discourse against China only recently, right? Because during the 1990s, the discourse is very different. In fact, there was like effectively accommodation with China, and if not outright cooperation and support. And so what's going on here? So after the Chinese Revolution in the middle of the 20th century, where they basically, this is an incredible revolution, by the way. Not only did they depose their own ruling class, they also fought against Western imperial powers who were involved in kind of neo-colonial formations in China. They had to boot them out. They're also fighting against their own local fascist party in a prolonged civil war that eventually led to the Communist Revolution in the middle of the 20th century. And what they did after that is they were immediately sanctioned by the West, which sought to strangle the development of their economy. And yet they nonetheless managed to achieve very substantial developments during this period, with some of the fastest improvements in social indicators ever recorded in history, right? Very, very impressive. But eventually, China reached a point where they thought, look, there's no way that we can continue our development successfully as long as we're under these sanctions, which prevent us from accessing necessary advanced technologies. And so to catch the technological frontier and remove our dependence on the West in this crucial elements, then we're going to have to open our markets to the West so that they're going to remove the sanctions and we can get sufficient technological development. And that's what happened in the 1990s. This was a massive benefit to the West at the time because they suddenly got access to extraordinary pools of cheap labor and resources in China that just came online into the world economy, right? And so Western producers moved a lot of their industrial production over to China to take advantage of that cheap labor and became very dependent on cheap labor in China. Now, what's happened since then is that China's development has accelerated very, very quickly, in large part because of their ability to use industrial policy to target strategic necessary developments, such as in leading advanced technology sectors, to the point where they're now like competing on AI and vehicle production, biotech, aviation, et cetera, et cetera. And also at the same time, wages in China are now increasing very dramatically as well. This is a development miracle that's been achieved in China as a result of their industrial policy. Now, this poses a threat to the United States and to the West more broadly in terms of their economic model for a couple of crucial reasons. The first is that Western firms are heavily dependent on cheap labor in China. But labor in China is no longer cheap, right? And so there's been, to the benefit of the Chinese working class, an extraordinary increase in the wages of manufacturing workers in China. Something like, I think it's like an 8-fold increase since 2005, right? Like very substantial improvements in the living conditions and wages of the working classes in China. But what that means is that it's pinching off Western profits who rely on cheap labor in China. And they're enraged about this, right? And so this is one of the reasons there's been this turn against China recently. Because again, in the 1990s, during the opening up period, the West was in love with China because it was providing them with cheap labor. Suddenly, labor in China is not cheap anymore, and the West is enraged. What do they want to do? They fantasize about going to war with China, Why? Because they want to destroy China's sovereign industrial capacity, force it back into a position of being a low-wage, dependent economy, where they can use China's cheap labor once again in the way they used to. But they're enraged because that's no longer really an option, because China's defense capacities are now such that the US could not win a war against China, right? They're also upset about China because China's industrial development has intruded on Western monopolies.
Yep.
Now, Western monopoly power over certain advanced sectors of the economy is extremely important to the West development model. Because as long as they have monopoly power over, say, biotech, pharmaceuticals, aviation technology, cars, producer goods, and things like that, like the things that every economy needs in order to function, that means that they can set the prices of those things very high.
Right.
And so global South countries are obliged to import those things from the West at high prices, which means they're forced to export a lot of their artificially cheapened production to the West in order to buy that stuff. What that means is there's a huge net flow of resources from the South to the North as a result of the West's monopoly power. China is now intruding on that monopoly power, meaning that global South countries can now access these technologies and goods from China on more favorable terms without subordinating themselves to a dependent export relationship with the West.
Got it.
So on both fronts, whether it's the erosion of their monopoly power or the increase of China's wages, this is severely negatively impacting capitalist profits in the core.
Got it.